Hello friends, welcome to Small Town Gallery. For today's episode, we're in the little town of La Grande, Oregon. La Grande is a town I spent almost 8 years of my life in as a college student and a recent graduate working in the world of media. I got married in this town, started my business in this town. In many ways, I came into my own here in La Grande. And the town is wonderful. It's the home of Eastern Oregon University, my alma mater, plus wonderful hole-in-the-wall artistic treasures including the La Grande Shakespeare Company, the Elgin Opera House, Ars Poetica poetry readings, and my favorite restaurant, Dining at the Landing on Adams Avenue. It's the home of white-tailed deer on every street corner, cops who wave at you while you jaywalk, the smell of mint in early fall, and Main Street parades for whatever reason people can come up to throw them for. Another artistic treasure of the town is the subject of this first episode of our new podcast, Bob Jenson, owner of the Potter's House. When you come up to the corner of 6th and Penn where the Potter's House is located, you'll see a large, white wooden painted sign with the name of the place. Well-tended flowers and other foliage cover the lawn, and old restored furniture rests on several porches around the home. Bob's wife restored that furniture herself. The home is painted blue and white with green shingles and is well taken care of. White lace is visible inside the windows, plus little glimpses of the pottery, paintings, and trinkets that decorate the walls. Off to the right of the home is a similarly painted building that hosts what was the Potter's gift house and still holds Bob's pottery studio, where he makes and displays his works of art. The space is small but open inside. On every shelf around, pottery in the shapes of bowls, plates, cups, and other more unique forms like vegetable steamers. And this is where we sit to do our interview.
I would sometimes rebel.
Bob has been throwing pottery for over 50 years. He considers it his greatest success. Bob is the son of a painter and sculptor from North Dakota. He studied at university, and since then he's been a painter, a sculptor, taught art to willing and unwilling high school and middle school students both here and in Nissa, a little town on the border of Idaho and Oregon 100 miles to the east. But most importantly, Bob has done here in La Grande what many of us as artists aspire to do, to make a humble but sufficient living doing, teaching, and living his art. And for this episode, Bob shared with me his story, plus some tips he's found over the years about uniting business and art successfully. We talk about things such as accepting adolescence as adolescence, delegating the sales and promotion of your business, thinking about what it means to you to make a living with your art, plus some practical tips on how to build a small town reputation and a local clientele. So, without further ado, here's Bob Jenson in La Grande, Oregon, on this first ever episode of Small Town Gallery. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm super excited.
My pleasure.
This is not the first time that we've been here.
No, we've been around this track a few times.
So for people listening, Bob and I have a history of me making him sit down with me and tell me his story. The last time we did this was for a project called the People Project, which is also available on the channel. And like we were talking about before, it's amazing the difference between how much equipment is necessary for video as opposed to audio. You know, we came in here and we pretty much made his house into a little studio, and so this is a little bit simpler. I think you would agree.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. No makeup or anything.
No makeup, no cameras, no lights. Just 2 cups of coffee, an audio recorder, and a couple hours to burn having conversation. So, with enough of me BSing. So, Bob, tell me first of all. Tell me just a little bit briefly. You are. We talk about in the intro. You have been doing this for a long time, and something we actually talked about when we filmed with the People Project was You mentioned that, your dad was an artist, and I find in my experience a lot of times people, either they go the direction of their parents or they go the exact opposite direction of their parents. And so I'm curious, did your father teach you anything about art and business? Because you said he was a sculptor, correct? Am I right about that?
Well, he was a stonemason, which he turned into sculpture.
Yeah.
Essentially, I kind of grew up around art because he had studied art as a young man. One of those guys that went to the Minneapolis Institute of Art as a very young man during the Depression, and only could make it through a year or so. They actually ate bags of chicken feed is how they stayed alive while they were in school. And he then went on, and life happens, and learned to weld in the shipyards part of the World War II, and then after he got out of the military, he studied photography and had a photography shop. And then again, life happens, and he had to care for my grandparents who were in North Dakota, and they'd homesteaded, but my grandfather ended up in construction doing concrete work. So my father migrated into that, and masonry work and concrete work were kind of his profession then as my growing up years. But he always continued to paint. He painted a lot. He did do some sculpture, and his niche became in the world of construction, working with free-form field stones, which are irregularly shaped and irregularly colored, to doing fireplaces and decorative walls and fronts on commercial buildings. Most of his bricklaying buddies don't want to mess with that kind of material. They want to just have square bricks so they can go just slam them babies in. Do 200 or 300 a day. And he liked to pick and choose and design and look at colors and textures and shapes to create basically a large sculpture either on a wall or freestanding things. So that kind of was, we were in North Dakota, and they had a lot of petrified and agatized wood that people would collect. And he got kind of to be the guy that would work with that stuff, because they're even worse than fieldstone because it's just irregularly chunks of what were wood, which are now, rock. So between that and then his painting and wood carving was kind of his sideline as growing up. I got a little bit of it, but I went to a small high school in North Dakota, so we didn't have an art program. So the only little bit of training I had was kind of working with him. And during my teenage years, though, as typically happens when he would try to correct me, I would sometimes rebel. So,
as do we all at points in our teenage years, I think.
So the instruction became less and less infrequent. And when I was in high school, I kind of liked the bookkeeping, so I thought, well, I'll be an accountant. So when I got out of high school, my first shot at secondary education was a business college. And after a year or so of that, year and a quarter, I decided this was back in the days before computers, so accountants literally wrote numbers in little square boxes on ledgers and balance sheets, and I couldn't see myself doing that as a profession. But that background proved very beneficial later on. We can kind of come back to that maybe. So I then thought, well, I was working in construction with my father, and I had a little bit of artistic background. And so I thought I'd maybe go architecture. I knew I didn't want to lay bricks or stones all my life. He wanted me to take over his business, but I thought, no way, man, I'm not doing this. So I went toward the architecture route, and the pre-architectural courses, you take a lot of artwork or art instruction, because back in the day, this is back in the 60s, there weren't computers and there weren't AutoCAD systems and so on. So architecture students had to learn how to draw and paint and render, because a lot of clients couldn't, if you show them a blueprint of a house or whatever, it's difficult for them to visualize what that's going to look like. So you had to have the ability to to make a watercolor painting, primarily is what they did, of the structure. So there was instruction then in basic design and color and drawing and all of that type of thing. And then the other part of the architectural program is engineering, and I didn't enjoy that at all, the mathematics and that goes into that. So I say, had I stayed with that, I'd designed buildings that would have looked phenomenal, but would have fallen at the slightest tremor, the type of thing. So I switched then to the art part. So that led me into the art, and then it was like, well, what am I going to do? As you have to make a living. I knew early on you can't just go be an artist in a garage somewhere. You're going to starve to death. And I wanted to have a legitimate, viable career. So then I looked at commercial art, which was then and still is a great occupation.
Could you define commercial art for maybe people who are listening?
Commercial art would be working for design ad companies, doing advertising, maybe doing animation.
Oh, okay.
Anything that just is commercially produced to be sold to people. Even working with magazines. Now, of course, more and more things are online, but still you have graphic designers, which is kind of the new commercial art, but you're working in a commercial setting, producing products or advertising that people buy.
Okay.
And even part of that is industrial design, where you're designing chairs and staplers and cars and paper clips, and that all has to be designed by somebody.
Right. I think we sometimes forget that a lot of the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, somebody out there designed.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Your tennis shoes, the design on the bottom of your tennis shoes.
Right.
You can't really touch pretty much anything you buy or consume, from clothing to food to packaging to all of that is what I fit into commercial art. So you're working either in the design phase or producing the advertising, and then it even spills into video production and audio for that matter. You've got the whole Hollywood, film, music. It's kind of amazing. We take it for granted. So backing up a notch, I actually decided to go the art education way. So I became an art teacher in high schools. And in that profession, then meeting with students that really latched on to art, many times their parents would discourage, well, you can't make any money as an artist. And I would kind of say, well, if you go into commercial art, pretty much everything you see and consume or buy is designed by an artist. Mm-hmm. Either the product is designed, or the promotion or the advertising is designed. So there's hundreds of millions of jobs in the arts. If you remove the artists, there's no music, there's no theater, there's no film, there's no books, there's no literature.
We live in a very dry world.
Yeah, we all wear gray coveralls and drive gray Volkswagen Beetles. To stop and think, what do artists do? What can I do with art? Well, it's just overwhelming almost when you consider it that way. So I spent then much of my professional life as a teacher, primarily in high school, some in junior high. And I did do some adjunct teaching in junior colleges, doing night classes and so on. But along the line, I got into producing things, of course, as well. And so that's, you got to figure out how to make a living. So I had a family, and as a teacher, you don't make gobs of money. And we decided my wife would be a home mom. So we were just living on a single salary for the most part. So to supplement my teaching income, then I did quite a bit of painting early on. And then I got into pottery, which I've been throwing pots now for 50 years, which is kind of unbelievable. But
so before we go into the modern age, do you mind if I jump back and ask a question about it? So one thing that I thought was interesting was, You said earlier that you had no desire to do the bricklaying stuff, so to lay bricks and to work in sort of that more construction level artwork that your father was doing. What was it about that profession that you were kind of like, and maybe what else were you looking for that kind of drew you in a different direction?
Well, I was in the, at that time I was the mud hod. I was the helper. I mixed the mortar and I hauled the rocks and stone up the scaffolding to my dad. And, it's hot. You work outside. It's 110 degrees. And I just thought, this is hard work. I want to use my brain, not my back. So I kind of...
Fair.
Now, as it turned out, the tradesman, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, especially in our time, if you don't mind the outdoor work, if you're drawn to that and some physical exertion, I'd have probably made way more money doing that than I did being an artist and a teacher. But, be that as it may. So it was basically that. As a young man, I just thought, this is too hard of work. I don't want to do this.
Was there something else you were kind of looking for? I mean, was there sort of an impulse to a particular type of art or a particular type, or was that even something you were thinking about at that point?
Not at that point. No, like I say, I started to do the office work, and that turned out to be, it's a good thing with the left brain, right brain thing. It was a disaster in that world. But, no, I'm just like young guys, I kind of like this and I got good grades in accounting. So let's be an accountant. Well, then you start to think about, do I really want to do this? Day after day after day, year after year after year. And so I think you have to be drawn to something that, like I say, if you find something you like, you'll have to work another day in your life. And so and even in my early teaching years, it was frustrating for me because as a college student, you get really idealistic, and you get out of college and you start to teach high school kids and junior high kids, and you want them to be passionate about their art and express their inner feelings, and they just care about what's going to happen Friday night, So there's a kind of a clash there, and you have to get past that. So I actually taught for 5 years, and then I just thought, this isn't it. So I quit teaching and pursued through my art degree, I had a business minor because I'd started that direction. And so I did have not only accounting, but, some business classes and business law, and which again served me well as I ventured into becoming a production artist. You're then a businessman. So we can get more into that probably later. But so it did, you just how things evolve. The Lord kind of guides and directs us sometimes, and we don't even know. Mm-hmm. So the combination of art and business really is kind of served me well. But at that point, I was just looking for something interesting, I guess. And so the corporate world, because of the business minor, I worked for a corporation, Montgomery Ward's, for a couple of years, and again discovered I was not corporate material. That wasn't anything that was I was drawn to. So then I became a production potter at that time, because I'd been throwing pots for several years. As a teacher, it was kind of my nights, weekends, summers activity, and I did a lot of watercolor painting too. It was to have products to sell to supplement my teaching income. And so when the corporate thing, I thought, so then I just started doing production pottery. This was back in the mid-'70s now. I'd moved from the Dakotas to Minnesota, now to Medford, Oregon. And that was the kind of the early hippie days where you were supposed to have your little acre and be self-sufficient. And so we did that. We found a little 3/4 of an acre with a little old house on it that needed work. And we thought, well, we can fix up the house and we can have our big garden, and we can, and I functioned that way. And that's kind of where I really refined my throwing skills, because I threw a lot of pottery then full time for about 1.5 years. I would produce it and then I would go wholesaling it to nurseries. I did planters and that type of thing, and gift stores and stores that sold dinnerware. I went from Medford to Ashland, out to Crescent City, and up the Oregon coast to Brookings. It's kind of a circuit I had. And then I was ripping in about $2,000 a year profit. It was amazing because we were, at that time, there were in that area a lot of people who were kind of like-minded. We were sort of rebelling against the whole materialism thing, and so there were skills banks you could be a part of. So you could trade what you did for all kinds of services, electricians and plumbers and doctors, and we were all basically hippies, But I didn't ever get into the drug scene and all of that. It was just that experience, I guess you'd say. But I got acquainted with a lot of artists and an art community that was strong. And then my children are now starting school. Two of them, grade school, and I began to think, well, I probably need to have a little more security here. I'm self-employed, so if I don't sell my pots, we don't eat, and other than what we could grow, and that in itself even can be a little inhibiting when you're producing work. You have to sell it, or you're going to starve, and so that maybe limits then your creative sense to try some weird new thing, which is fine, but that my stomach would growl. So and I'm old enough now that I'm in my late 20s where I got to provide for my wife and children, and so anyway, so at that point I applied for teaching jobs, and I went back into teaching high school, and it worked out much better. I then decided to accept adolescents as adolescents, not try to make them seniors in college or young adults passionate about their art. They're kids, and they are great to work with because they do. I mean, they have their flashes of being super creative or passionate about their work, but they're kids, and so they're still really interested in what's going on Friday night, and so I went back then as a artist teacher. Now I'm producing art and teaching, and worked out much better. It got to be really enjoyable working with kids. And I was 15 years in Nissa, Oregon, and then the last 12 years I taught in La Grande, Oregon, which is a bigger high school. And those are my best years. This was fantastic working with the kids.
So, quick question for you. So, let's jump back a little bit to where you actually decided to jump into throwing pottery full time. Because I think a lot of people find themselves in the position of where they have their day job, and they have their pottery per se, their weekends and evenings and summers job, their thing that they really enjoy. Maybe they use it as a supplementary income, maybe they use it as whatever. What made you decide that it was time to sort of move into that world of doing that full time for a while? Do you feel like, and you mentioned God earlier a little bit, was it something that you felt like God was pushing you to at that point, or was it just sort of an impulse? How did you know that was the right move per se, or was it the right move, or was it just a move?
I think some of both. You sort of assess what you're doing, and if you're not happy with your profession, then you take a look at, okay, what could I do? What else could I do here? Because it needs to be enjoyable, but like I say, you also need to, if you're serious about it, you need to derive some income from it. And I was prayerful at that time. Early on, in my early years, I'd sort of rejected the whole God thing in the 60s, like we were rejecting everything. And then it occurred to me that, there is a God. And there was this guy, Jesus, who literally was here. And it's a historical fact that he was here and was crucified. And then, better than that, was raised from the dead. So I kind of came back into more of a realistic relationship with God. And so I always prayed to guide and direct, and sometimes we get ahead of God and sometimes not, because we also have this brain. We've got free will. So to depend on God doesn't mean you just sit there and wait for manna from heaven, because it may or may not come. So I think there's God expects us to use our intellect and our reasoning, and so you prayerfully just move on, and doors open and doors close. In fact, after I left the corporate world, and then I what can I do? And pottery was just sort of there, because I'd also, while I was working, I did take some classes from a potter in Ashland. And so I was kind of working with it, and then I thought, well, this is something that I kind of enjoy. And then the other thing that pulled me to pottery is it's easier to sell pottery than paintings, because I was painting at the same time too. Because pottery's it's one of the things that pulled me to that. It's functional, but it's also very artsy. It's decorative. So you've got that functionality and that element of the artistic side of it. People have my stoneware. Most of them enjoy using it, but they also enjoy handling it, looking at it. Usually, the functional pieces, which I do a lot of. And so it just seemed like, okay, this is something I can do. So that's when I kind of started doing it. It was something that was there. It was, but like I say, after a year and a half being self-employed like that, and my desire maybe to say I need to get something that's a little more permanent, that has a paycheck and benefits. I don't know, that might have been a carnal decision.
Right.
But I don't think there's anything wrong in God's scheme to have health insurance. So I'm not one of those faith healer type people. And so when I applied for teaching, that I definitely think God had a hand in that, because this was at a point in time, this was 1976. I just started applying, and in those days you didn't apply online and all of that. You typically went to university where they posted openings in teaching education, and then you wrote a letter to the school requesting a application, and you'd get the application back, you'd fill it out and send it back in, and they may or may not call you for an interview. I mean, that was the process. So typically you'd start to get a teaching job in the fall, you'd start doing this early spring, because the process took some time. And so I would go to Southern Oregon College in Ashland and go to the art department listings, and I just started applying. I wanted to stay in the West Coast, so I was applying in Oregon and a little bit of Washington. I heard all kinds of scary things about how weird Californian people were, so I didn't want to go down there very much. But and so I sent out 50 applications or so, and I didn't. A couple of them I heard back from, and at this point in time there was an oversupply of teachers, so they were getting 30 to 40 to 50 applications for each teaching job. And so it was just tough going, and it got to be late August, and I haven't heard anything, and I'm thinking, man, I'd really like to do this. So I saw this opening in Nissa, Oregon, and so I just called. I called instead of write the letter, can I have an application? I just called the school district office and said, I'd like to apply. Can you send me an application? And the secretary talked to me a little bit, found out I was from the Midwest. She said, well, I'm going to put you through to the superintendent. So, bam, here I am talking. Typically, when you went for an interview, you talked to either the superintendent or the principal or both in a school district. This was a small school. And so he kind of interviewed me on the phone, on the spot, and said, yeah, I think I'd like to have you come for an interview. I said, great, I'll be there. I want date and time. So fine, we set it up. He said, now remember, we're on a mountain time zone. And I hung up the phone and I thought, where did I just call? I had no idea where Nissa, Oregon was, because I'm in, I'm in Medford in the I-5 corridor. And I'd come from the Midwest, so I wasn't familiar with Eastern Oregon at all, because I'd come through this Nevada and California and up. So I'd never even been to Eastern Oregon.
And so for people listening, Nyssa is probably about an hour or two west of Boise, Idaho. Is that about right?
Yeah. It's about 45 minutes, actually.
Yeah. Oh, 45 minutes. So it's right on the border between Oregon and Idaho. So that's kind of where we're looking at. Not an overly populated area, or an area where, it's a pretty small town.
Yeah. It's a very small town. Maybe 1,500 people, and literally the end of Main Street, you cross the bridge and you're in Idaho. So it's right on the Snake River, which was a really interesting place. But so anyway, I go there to interview, and he hired me, and I thought, man, this is really a blessing. But as I look back, I didn't even have an Oregon teaching certificate, because I taught in Minnesota. And then I'd been out for 3 years of teaching, and I was applying for jobs, and it's kind of unheard of, now that they want to know if you have a certificate to teach before, they hire you. And so, just the way that whole scenario worked out, I felt that God was put me there. Plus, the superintendent said, man, I've never met an art teacher that isn't really weird, and you're from North Dakota, so you got to be okay. So it helped, I guess.
You didn't tell him you were from Ashland. No. You were currently living in Ashland, though.
No. So that was one of the instances. And then even when I came to LeGrand, the same thing kind of happened. I spent 15 years in Nyssa, and in the process of I had a teaching certificate from North Dakota and Minnesota, but to get certified in Oregon, they had all these crazy classes you had to take in addition to extra psychology classes and all this kind of stuff. So, and diversity training, and there were multiple things I had to take to get certified. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do all that, I might as well get a master's degree, because we're 45 minutes from Boise State. So took me 7 years, but through the nights, weekends, couple of summer classes, I did get a master's degree. And I eventually got certified to teach in Oregon. Well, they give you a temporary to start with, so you have some time to get this done. So then by then I had high school and middle school, and then they made I had a sixth grade class, and I was trying to teach sixth grade, and then the next period would be seniors, juniors, and seniors, and I wasn't enjoying that part of it at all. To me, you have to have a special anointing to teach middle school, because those people are weird. Their hormones are bonkers, and there's a special group of people that teach those guys, and they're great, but I wasn't one of them. So I thought, well, I got to see if I can get to a high school, just pure high school. So that's why I applied here and up at Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and somewhere else. Can't even remember now. But in those, typically when a school district wants to hire a new teacher, or someone retires and they're going to replace them, or they're going to expand a program, they want either a beginning teacher or somebody that's got 1 or 2 years experience, because they're cheaper to hire. If you're on the top of the salary schedule, which in education, you start and you get each year, you typically get a raise, and the more education you have, you get a raise, and there's a salary schedule that you move up through. Well, I'm on the top. I've got 15 years experience and a master's degree plus. And so I don't come cheap at this point in time. But it just so happened that in LeGrand, they were expanding programs, and they were kind of switching. They went to what's called a block schedule, which is students take 4 classes a day instead of 7 or 6. And so they needed another art teacher. And the principal wanted somebody with experience. It's because he wanted to build a program. He didn't want to have a brand new teacher. And for the way the budget works, and the state had just kicked back some extra money. Anyway, they had some extra money to spend. So it just so happened that particular year, he hired me. And so again, I think that was not the norm, So I felt again that God had placed me here. If you're not a believer, you could say it's all happenstance, but I choose to believe I was directed those places. And so all this time I'm continuing to produce pottery and paint. And in summers we would do art fairs and art shows. And then when I moved here, we got acquainted with the manuals in Joseph and got acquainted with there's an art community in Joseph which was very strong, built around the bronze casting foundry industry. And there were several galleries up there that sell bronzes, and at that point there were 3 foundries in Wallowa County that were casting bronze. So it was a rich culture, and my summers then I spent there producing a lot of pottery, a little bit of painting. I was getting more and more into pottery, and I did a lot of raku, which is a fast process that has a metallic finish on it and kind of really blended well with the bronzes in the bronze galleries. And so
And raku is a type of firing the pots, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's part of the ceramic process, but it's different than stoneware. It's much quicker, and there's smoke, steam, and fire. It's very hands-on.
Watch the People Project. We saw some raku in the People Project.
Yeah, the People Project. Yeah, on my website, there's actually a video of me firing. So, I got, more and more acclimated that way. And then at the same time, my wife had worked in retail, and after our kids had gone to school, she got kind of more into that end of things. And then we moved to LeGrand. She worked in a gift store. And so that she became really enamored with the gifts and gift selling, and she loves selling and working with people. And so we decided we would start a gift store gallery, which is when the Potter's House was born, which was around, I think when we first started with the name, probably about 1995. And again, it started in Joseph, but then we decided we needed to do something in LeGrand because we could do it year round. Joseph was just a summer thing for me. So we started our current location in 2000, and it worked really well. And it got to the point in 2004 where I was having trouble keeping up because I really had a great thing going at the high school. I loved teaching. I was getting a little tired of dealing with politicians and judges controlling my life, which is the story of, public education. So the politics of education began to wear on my independent spirit, I guess. So we decided that I would quit teaching early, take early retirement to do the gift store gallery full time. So from 2004 until really now, say 15 years ago, the last 15 years, it's been, we've been full-time business people, so to speak. And it's during these years where that early business training became very useful to me.
It all kind of came back, circled around where
Right.
You got that business.
Right. So who figured this all out? I didn't start with this plan, but somebody did.
So that kind of,
Somebody directed me to business college.
That kind of brings up an interesting question of, you as an artist, you've worn a lot of hats. You've been a teacher, you've been a hippie, self-proclaimed hippie, you've been now you're a business person, So do you see, what am I trying to ask here? Do you see, what is the thread that has sort of remained consistent throughout all of these things? What is that love for the art, or is it a desire to create? Is there something, or because I think as artists we definitely do take on a lot of different forms over the course of our lives. At one point we're doing something for full-time 8 to 5. Maybe the next 10 years we're self-employed doing something. But was there something for you that stayed the same? Was it a heart? Was it I don't know. And you can interpret that however you want to.
Yeah, I think the urge to create is present in everyone. I think it's maybe stronger in some people than others. But I think for me, the thread that kind of continues through the whole thing is that taking materials and turning them into something that are either functional or aesthetic or beautiful or both is something that always has driven me. And even now, I've made, I don't know, tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of pots. And people say to me, "Do you ever get tired making cups?" And or pots or bowls. And like anything, that you've done a lot of, there are those times when it gets a little mundane or repetitive. But that spark of, I'm going to take this piece of mud and turn it into something that is useful to people, that they appreciate, and that's also decorative or aesthetic, or turn it into a sculpture or something that's purely decorative, just always sustains me. It's why I do what I do. And so that, I think, probably started very early on and never has gone away. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm 73 years old now. I should be retired. Well, what am I going to do? I have to make stuff. And so I guess I stay with pottery because I just enjoy, like I say, taking a mundane piece of mud and turning it into something that's either functional or decorative or both, and that people appreciate. I used to paint a lot. I haven't painted a picture in probably 8 or 9 years. I might go back to that sometime. I don't know. But it didn't, I got in painting, I like watercolor better than oils because it's less controllable. I like controlled chaos kind of stuff. So I like raku and even stoneware to some extent. I mean, you put all this stuff together and stick it in a kiln and fire it to 2,300 degrees, and things are somewhat out of your control in there. I mean, you have some idea, but you're not, it's just doing its thing. And watercolor's kind of like that. With oil painting, you place and you mix and you put it but with watercolor, to make it work, it's got to be kind of loose and fluid, and a good watercolor looks kind of like controlled chaos. So I may go back to that at some point, but I did lots of landscape and this and that. And even now when I look at my work and other people's work, it's a pretty tree or a pretty old barn, but I don't want to, I just don't want to paint that anymore. I think that sometimes that takes people back to abstract. People say, what leads you to abstract art? Well, I guess it's more creative, or, it's like once you can do it, once you can make a tree look like a tree, and then, I don't know. That's just my thing. There are painters that have to paint. I mean, a true painter has to paint. There's no option.
I remember hearing that Van Gogh said that he absolutely had to paint 8 hours a day, or else it drove him crazy. He painted 8 hours a day, and he had to paint. He couldn't not paint. It was like almost like this sort of manic drive for him, And I don't think you're gonna cut your ear off anytime, soon, but it kind of sounds similar in that, like, you feel like you kind of have this drive, like, where you have to make pottery.
Yeah, you have to do something. Yeah. Well, I had my times when I'd throw pots against the wall if they didn't work out right. My wife would hear things exploding. But I've sort of matured past that now. If I wreck something, it still bothers me if things don't come out the way I want. But you know what? It's just a pot, So, but yeah, so there is that thread, I think, in most people that are creative. I mean, you may have your periods where you have to pull away a little bit and reflect, but you have to do something, right. And I'd rather do this than anything else, I guess.
So that's kind of the passion. So let's talk a little bit, about the business side of it, the way that you've actually been able to, turn it into something that has been able to sustain you over the years. And, that's through the Potter's Gift House. I mean, obviously selling your skills as a teacher, but majorly, especially for the last 15, 20, almost 20 years now, it's been through the Potter's Gift House.
Right.
So you mentioned that, having that background in business might have helped you sort of in the practical ways of starting a business. Were there other things that maybe helped you to learn how to turn your art into something which was lucrative enough to sort of sustain you so you could continue to do that?
Yeah, well, it's the recognizing that in the arts, you have to be a business person. And that's sort of a dichotomy with some, artist, the pure artist, idealistic artist. I just want to create my art. I don't want to sell, which is great, but you got to put bread on the table somehow. So if you're going to be that way, then you have to work some other kind of job and then just do your art. But I always thought, if I'm passionate about what I make, I'm not prostituting myself to sell it. I'd rather make art that I can sell and derive my living that way. And so it's always been more satisfying to me to make art that someone wants to buy than to make art that I put in a gallery or put in a competition or an art show to win a bunch of money. Because if you're, and I've been in art shows and I've won prizes, but not to the extent that some people do. And the reason for that is if you're just winning a prize, then a judge who may be an artist or maybe somebody's brother-in-law that got stuck with the job of judging, someone selects your work as a prize. And I have judge shows, and that doesn't mean if I get the prize that I'm all that much better than anybody else. It's just they picked me that day. But to me, it's a higher honor when someone's going to lay down their hard-earned money that they derive from whatever they do, whatever their passion is. It's their money, and they're putting their money down to buy my work. To me, that's a higher compliment than being adjudicated as the best of show somewhere. And so I've kind of always, and there are artists that disagree with that. They disagree with the whole commercial part of art. But so I think early on, if you're going to make a living as an artist, you've got to deal with the whole business marketing side of things. And so you've either got to do that yourself, do it all yourself, which is, I found, difficult. Because the producer, the artist, the creative person, a lot of times isn't the one best suited to do the marketing and the selling of it. And that's why there's a lot of very competent artists that just have never been able to make a living, because they don't either want to do the production and the promotion and the sales side, or they just aren't good at it, or for whatever reason. So I kind of advise people, and even if you are good at all of that, it's difficult to do it all by yourself, because producing is kind of a full-time job, and so is sales and marketing. And so it's, I think, very beneficial, if not totally required, to have somebody that works with you that does the marketing and the promotion and the layout and the designing of things. And my wife this morning still is dealing with the IRS because we changed our business name from an LLC to a joint partnership or single proprietorship when we closed the gift store 2 years ago. Well, the accountant at the time forgot to tell the government that we changed our name. And so now our credit card provider, this is nuts and bolts. Our credit card
Sorry,
provider,
no, it's good.
Says
these nuts and bolts are what people deal with every day.
That's right. Our credit card provider says your business name doesn't match with the IRS, and oh my gosh! So then you got to pay. You can get fined for this kind of stuff, So you have to have a business. We're registered with the state and all this and that. So anyway, and she, bless her heart, I could not, if I had to do this, I'd be closed tomorrow. Spent 2 hours on the phone yesterday with the IRS and then with another person just to straighten this all out. We just changed our name, but we didn't fill out the paperwork correctly. And it's just that kind of stuff. And just as the years have gone by, you know, you have to constantly deal with advertising and what works and what doesn't work, and buying ads in travel magazines and art magazines and applying to art shows. And it just takes an exhaustive amount of time to do all of that stuff, which to me takes me out of the studio. So my recommendation to people starting out is figure that out. And it's probably the best to team up with somebody, either a business partner or a wife or a partner of some kind or other, somebody that's going to do that stuff.
Right, and that frees you up to continue to be able to produce.
Right. And in my case, it works out good because Judy likes to sell and is a salesperson. She can sell snowballs to Eskimos, literally. And I'm done. My thing is I made this. Okay, I'm done. You can have it for $1. No, we need to have $50. And so,
Bob, we have to eat. You can't sell this for $1.
Yeah, well, we have rent to pay, and at one time we had 7 employees, and we got all of that. So you have to figure that out.
Right.
And then I think the other thing people have to understand if they're going to start, okay, whatever my art is, I want to make a living at it. What's a living? You know, are you going to require 6-figure income? Maybe this isn't the thing for you to do. But is it important enough to do what you do that you can live on? I don't know, what's the figure? You have to figure out what's the figure. What do I need? How big of a house do I need? How nice of a car do I need? If you have children, you know, you got to raise them little buggers, educate them. So those are considerations. So that's what kind of led me, I think, initially to something that gave me a stable income. And it was teaching. It didn't have to be. I mean, you know, like I say, you could go to work for Hallmark greeting cards, designing their cards, which is another thing. Somebody designs all those cards that you buy, and they change all the time.
They don't just pop out of the thin air Hallmark.
They just don't show up on the
ethereal.
shelf.
Yeah, the elves don't deliver them.
No. So it's to figure out some kind of, you know, what's the balance. And there are a lot of things you can do that provide that stability. Or there are people. Don Gray is a local artist here that went to Eastern Oregon. He's been a painter his whole life. And he does well now. I mean, you know, but I don't know if his wife helped a lot. You know, I mean, sometimes somebody else does whatever they do. But those are considerations that have to be taken into, I think.
Tell me a little bit about your biggest. You can tell me the story of your biggest success or your biggest failure as an artist, business person, and what you learned from it.
Biggest success. I was thinking about this yesterday. I think it's that I produced pottery for 50 years. That's not a singular event, but the fact that I've been able to do it, I would say that's my biggest success. My biggest failure was starting the gift store. I'm glad my wife isn't here. Just because it's so difficult to make money in our current time buying and selling merchandise. It's just very on a small scale. I mean, you can't compete with the big box stores. And actually, the reality, in the last 10 years is to compete with Amazon or, your online retailers. So that's something that we were not able to really deal with, and basically drove us out of business to some extent. And even now, I have a website where you can buy my work. But if you order a bowl from me, that's say a $50 bowl, and you want it shipped somewhere, if you're in Portland, or it's going to cost you $25 or $30 to get it there. Mm. And because just shipping in the last few years has just increased exponentially. And people are now accustomed to buying from Amazon where shipping's free. Mm-hmm. So they'll sometimes say, well, can you ship this to me? And I say, yeah, I can ship it to you, but no, well, wait a minute. It's going to cost me as much to have it shipped to me as it does for the piece? Yeah, it is. And so that's just it was just a hard thing in that, being able to deal with that. And we're older, we're retirement age, so there's also, we don't have the desire anymore to, here I am. If you want something, come find me. Although we did have a lady from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in the store this summer, mid-July, she was an elementary teacher. And her sister lives here, so she's been in the store a few times over the years, and she's bought some work from me. And if they're driving, they can haul it, and flying, sometimes you can haul it. But there was this real unique little rocking chair that Judy we picked it up at a yard sale in Boise, Idaho, and Judy redid it. It was a really interesting, fun piece. And she loved this chair. And she said, I'm an elementary teacher. I can see this in my classroom. It was low to the ground so I can sit and the kids can sit around me and this and that. I said, and she said, but I'm flying. So I said, well, I could ship it to you. Like, flip it, dumb statement. She goes, really? So anyway, she buys this chair, $75 for the chair. To ship it to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, was $382.
Wow. So
she had left. She paid us for the chair and left. And I said, well, it's going to be expensive. I knew, but I didn't think it was going to be that bad. It's going to be spendy to get that to you. So I'll let you know before I ship it. So I first went to the shipping places. Well, the box, I had to put it in a box. The box was just slightly too big for what they take. So then you have to go to FedEx Freight or UPS Freight. So anyway, turns out FedEx Freight was the cheap, but so I called her and it's going to be $380 some. And she was like, I want the chair. Ship it. So that was the exception to the rule, I guess. So, and she sent us a picture of her in her classroom with her kids. And, it was something that really spoke to her and she was willing to pay that. But wow. For the most part, people are not going to do that. So,
wow. Yeah. If you had a billboard and you could put one thing on it for maybe young artists who are wanting to turn their passion into a career, what would it say?
It would say, learn the craft well, be ready to work your butt off, and stick to it. If you have a passion for something and you're really good at it, if you get yourself really good at it and you refuse to quit, you'll make it. Mm.
So tenacity, work, and learning.
There you go. Yeah. Learn the skill well, work hard at it, and stick to it. Mm. Yeah, you said you're a better words guy than I am. There's a reason I draw pictures.
I'm a parrot. That's what I do. I just hear what people say and just repeat it back to them.
Right.
That's what an interviewer really is he's just a glorified parrot that he just synthesizes things.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and maybe even an addendum to that, be prepared to do what you have to, because sometimes in the process of establishing yourself, you might have to do some things that aren't really in your wheelhouse of your passion, but I mean, like say, you got to put bread on the table somehow. So you have to be maybe prepared to be a little diversified that way.
So it's interesting to me that, you know, your life has kind of gone in these different directions of teaching and art. And we mentioned this earlier. And I think a lot of times there's sort of this myth among, you know, people, especially like young artists, that the ideal situation is where you become like a famous artist and, you know, maybe you're making movies or and what you're doing is you have one career and you stick with that through your whole life. But I think what oftentimes is more of the reality is that you do your art and you have your art and you consistently do it. But, you know, maybe for 10 years here, you're teaching your art. And maybe for another 10 years, you're doing your art on the side and you're working another career. It seems like that's sort of the route that most people take when they're, you know, doing their art. There's not just there are some people definitely who are like, I have been a painter since I was 25, and then that just stuck with me and now I'm 75, you know, kind of a thing. But it sounds more like a lot of times people, you know, they do it for a time, and they have that they're always doing it, but maybe it only is their full-time gig for a while, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely happened to me. You know, I started out in my bachelor's degree, I was in art. I had never thrown a pot in undergraduate work. I did some clay sculpture, but I was a drawing, painting, other kind of guy. But then when I became a teacher, especially in the mid-'70s, that was the first hippie thing. And man, you had to eat and drink out of stoneware, not plastic crap from Walmart. So all the kids wanted to make pottery, and we had wheels. So I had to go take a class. So that started it. So then you kind of, I think you just, and then even producing, you know, to start with, I was producing paintings and pottery to sort of supplement my teaching income. And then it became my full-time thing. But even in that context, there's different ways to sell. We did art fairs for a while, in the arts, or you can go to galleries and try to, you know, get your work in galleries or in stores on a consignment basis. Because that's into the whole marketing. How do I market? How do I actually sell what I make? I've always been far more successful selling myself, and selling through either the art fairs where you have a booth and you sell your own work, or like say for the last 25 years plus, we've had our own store of some kind or other, either a full-time location like we have now, or going to fairs. I've never had a lot of luck with galleries selling my work for me, at least not to the degree or volume that I needed to sustain any kind of income. So I think that's a choice you make. And to me, like I say, it was always important for me to kind of deal with people and have them know them and have them put their hard-earned money down for what I make versus giving it to some dealer somewhere and let them deal with it. If you want to do that route, you know, and you can, artists can do that. If you're going to go the gallery route, then you have to enter a lot of shows, like I was talking about. You have to win shows and win prizes. And so you build a resume kind of in that world, and you get to a level then where the bigger time galleries want to take you on. And it's possible to do that. It's harder. Because the big galleries are connected with the people, the big money people who will spend thousands of dollars for a painting or a sculpture or the like, a photograph, documentary. And, you know, that's a sort of a different track that I chose not to take because I like the people contact, I guess. Plus, I've never been very excited about doing all the paperwork that you have to do. If you're going that way, then you've got to do all these applications, and it's just a lot of production of photographs and or now it's online stuff. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff involved in play. You sort of have to play the game. Mm-hmm. Same thing in theater or whatever. You start low level and you got to get connected and you got to get recognized. And I just kind of out there doing my thing, selling pots out of the trunk of my car and eventually out of my store. So anyway, there's multiple ways to approach that.
Right. So in that kind of, I think that kind of brings me to, sort of the thing that is, that I'm sensing is that, you've chosen the route of, building a relationship and selling your art based on relationship, based on the communities that you're in, based on, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And as opposed to, like you said, playing the game, trying to get the rapport in the galleries.
And that's not bad. That's just another way to do it.
Right. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just different,
right.
And the way that you've kind of chosen is, for lack of a better term, the small town route. Even though you might do it in a bigger town, you're still building that integral community around you that you know, and that, when they drive through LeGrand, they stop in the store and say, I want that rocking chair, and, I'm willing to pay $75 for it and then an extra $400 to get it to me in Iowa.
That's an extreme case.
Right. But that's the kind of route that you've taken, is the building of that community and that connection. And I guess, do you have, and this I think probably will be my last question for you, do you have, say somebody wants to take that route, that's the direction. They're not really that interested in the galleries and the acclaim and selling to six-figure income people. They just kind of want to build a small community-based business based on their artistic passion. What would your suggestion for them be? What would a tip be for them?
Work hard. Same back to the learn,
read your billboard.
Read the billboard. Produce a good product. Work a lot and stick to it. It takes a long time to, another trip business-wise, and it was helpful in our gift stores and most artists build a mailing list. So, you start collecting data and you get emails or addresses of customers, supporters of yours. And you gotta get like we have 3,500 people on our list after 20 years. So if we want to do something special, we send out an email or send out a mailing, and we have a connection with that. But that didn't start overnight. That's a very useful tool because you're connected with, these are your people. And we do things promotionally. Well, Judy does. Every month out of our list, we'll pick out 100 people and just send them a card. Or we have in our computer systems, we send out, we have birthdays for people. So as we were gathering through the years, we try to get name, email, phone number, birthday. So we'll send them now a card where you get $10 off a purchase as a birthday present. And that brings people in, And of course, she's got to print the cards, print the labels, stick the labels on, it's a small operation type stuff. But that's an important tool. Where else was I going with that?
I don't know. Yeah.
Things
you know that, Bob.
Things to do. But just developing that rapport with your people. And some artists will do like a gallery opening, or I've done a couple times when I'll do a raku firing, which is a fun demonstration. You've seen them, I think. So you do some activities or events like that to bring people in. And you can do that based on your local folks, but it helps to have a bunch of people out there, Now there are potters that live out in the woods and they have a little stand by the road and with a jar, put your money in the jar. That's another way to do it. Sort of a self-service vending machine, I've never tried to do something like that because I think I needed to sell more than that. But yeah, figuring out, and it helps to be, frankly, I think helps to be near a bigger metro area. Mm-hmm. And we're okay here. If you're in a little town way out in the middle of nowhere, I think might be tougher. Again, because, I find I have good customers that have been buying work from me for years. Well, pretty soon they've kind of filled their house up, and people always need gifts, of course, so that is ongoing. But the bigger your kind of customer base is, the better. And so you have to kind of build that. And location is kind of important for that, I think. Unless you're in it now, the other side of that is when we were in Joseph, when I was teaching, we had our store in Joseph in the summers. And there it's an artsy place, but it's a touristy place. So you have a different group of people every weekend almost. So your supply is constant. And that's, I think, a little easier if you're in a kind of a touristy area. Plus, people, when you're on vacation, you tend to spend a little more money. I want to buy a mug from Joseph, or we need this. The people are looking to kind of purchase things, which is helpful. The problem with Joseph, and I considered going up there full time, leaving LeGrand when I quit teaching, but it's a very short season there. It's not a year-round location, so you kind of have a 90-day period, late June through September, and then there's not a lot going on. And so locations where, if you're looking to locate somewhere, if you have touristy type like that and more of a sustained year-round season, it's probably beneficial.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful interview, and I've gotten things out of it. And what's interesting to me about this conversation is that many of the things that you're talking about, an email list, positioning yourself in a location that people are already sort of looking to buy, mm-hmm. are things that are still common practices and good practices today, in the world of like online marketing, email marketing, those kinds of things. It's just that they've been transplanted into the digital world as
right.
opposed to existing sort of on a plane of, brick and mortar. You walk in the front door and, like we just had a few minutes ago, and there's products on the shelves and so on and so forth. So it's interesting to me how much has changed, but how little has changed in the same vein of kind of a thing. It's just people play with different technology.
Yeah, the principles are the same. It's just different venues, I think. Yeah.
Right.
And we've been sort of dragging and screaming into the online operation.
I don't think you're the only one to feel that sentiment.
The younger people probably made much more efficient at that.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on the show. And if maybe some years down the road, we'll come back and we'll do an episode 2. But it's been really enlightening. So thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
My great pleasure.
There's blood in the water. Know that it won't last. My light is brighter, and I hope that it will last.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're interested in hearing more, all of the interviews can be found on our SoundCloud or on our website, peopleprojectmedia.com. Small Town Gallery is a production of People Project Media, and all of our other people-related content can be found on our website and our YouTube channel. If you liked what you heard today, please don't hesitate to share and subscribe. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the tips, stories, or just the personality today. We'll see you next time, who knows where and with who knows who, again, on Small Town Gallery.
And I love you until we get by.